The morning sun rose gently over the city, its golden light spilling across tall glass buildings and busy streets below. Expensive cars lined the driveway of the billionaire CEO's mansion, polished so brightly they looked like mirrors under the sun. Inside the massive house, silence hung heavy. The marble floors shone, the chandeliers sparkled, and everything was in perfect order. But before the family even stirred from their beds, one person was already at work. Maria moved. Quietly, her footsteps soft against the polished tiles. She wore a simple uniform, neat and clean, her dark hair pulled back into a bun. In one hand, she carried a small basket of supplies. In the other, a cloth she used to dust the endless furniture that decorated the home. To many, she was invisible, just another worker behind the scenes. But to her, every detail mattered. She believed that her work reflected not only the house she served, but also the kind of person she was inside: hardworking, careful, and proud. Even in silence, the house was enormous, with hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Maria had memorized every corner, every shelf, every fragile vase that needed polishing. She knew the routine better than anyone. She started in the kitchen, wiping down counters that already gleamed, arranging fruit in the silver bowl, and making sure the coffee machine was ready before the CEO woke up. Then she moved through the living room, straightening cushions, dusting the piano keys, and ensuring the newspapers were placed neatly on the glass table. It was ordinary work, but Maria did it with quiet dedication. While she worked, her thoughts wandered. She thought about her small apartment across town, about her daughter waiting at school, about the bills piled on her table. Life wasn't easy, but she never allowed struggle to break her spirit. She reminded herself that every sweep of her cloth, every polished corner, was another step toward giving her daughter a better future. As she climbed the stairs toward the CEO's private office, she glanced at the family portraits along the wall. The CEO stood proudly in each picture, his arm around his elegant wife, his children smiling beside him. Maria often wondered what it must feel like to live such a life: wealth, respect, and power at your fingertips. Yet, she also knew that wealth didn't guarantee kindness. Too often, people like her were overlooked, treated as though they had nothing to offer but a broom and a mop. Still, she never let bitterness live in her heart. She carried herself with quiet pride, reminding herself that every person, no matter their job, had value. The office door creaked open as she stepped inside. The room smelled faintly of leather and coffee. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with thick business books and trophies from the CEO's achievements. A large desk stood at the center, covered with files, pens, and the faint glow of a computer. Screen left on from the night before. Maria began her work here too, wiping the desk carefully, dusting the shelves, and making sure the room looked ready for another busy day of business. She noticed details that no one else would: fingerprints on the glass, smudges on the polished wood, dust settling near the keyboard. With steady hands, she cleaned each one, careful not to disturb the important papers stacked neatly in files. She didn't know what those papers contained: contracts, deals, numbers beyond her imagination, but she treated them with respect. For Maria, this was just another morning, the same routine she had repeated countless times. Yet something in the air felt different. The house was quieter than usual, as though it was holding its breath. She didn't know that her life was about to change. She didn't know that in just a few minutes she would hear a sound that would draw her into a situation far beyond. Dusting shelves and polishing floors, her hands paused as she set a vase back on the shelf. The silence of the office was broken by a sudden ring. The sharp sound of the phone cut through the air, startling her. She froze, her eyes darting to the desk. The phone sat there, its small screen flashing with an incoming call. Maria hesitated. She wasn't supposed to touch the phone. It wasn't her place. That device was reserved for the CEO, for his assistants, for people who belonged in this world of power and money. She was just the maid. The phone rang again, louder this time, echoing through the room. Maria's heart began to race. She looked around, half expecting someone else to appear, but no one came. The house was still, and she was the only one there to hear it. She bit her lip, uncertain. What if it was important? What if it was an emergency? Her hand trembled slightly as she reached toward it. She told herself she would just pick it up, just explain politely that the CEO wasn't available. That was all. Nothing more. She didn't know that on the other end of that call was the CEO's biggest client. She didn't know that her voice, her calmness, and her hidden strength would soon become the reason a billion-dollar deal survived. For now, it was just an ordinary morning. But for Maria, ordinary was about to end. The silence of the office was broken by that sharp, insistent sound. The phone kept ringing, steady and impatient, as though demanding that someone answer it right away. Maria froze, her hand still clutching the dustcloth, her heart beating faster with each chime. She wasn't supposed to touch it. That was one of the unspoken rules of the mansion. Never touch what doesn't belong to you, never step beyond your place. The phone was for the CEO, or maybe his personal assistant. Not for her, but the ringing continued, loud and urgent, filling the empty room. Maria looked toward the door, half expecting someone to appear, but the hallway was empty. No assistant, no secretary, not even one of the other staff. She was alone. The sound seemed to press against her ears, impossible to ignore. Her mind raced. What if it was something important? What if the CEO was waiting for a call and the person on the other end hung up? What if the opportunity was lost because no one had picked it up? She thought of all the times she had overheard the CEO shouting at his staff for missing deadlines or failing to act quickly. Her stomach tightened at the thought of being blamed. The phone rang again. She bit her lip and stepped closer. Her hand hovered over the receiver. She whispered to herself, "Just answer. Just tell them he's not here." She told herself it would only take a second. She would be polite, professional, and brief. Nothing more. Finally, she picked up. "Hello," she said softly, her voice unsure. There was a pause, then a crackling sound on the line. A man's voice came through, heavy with an accent. "Hello? Is this Mr. Carter, the CEO?" Maria's breath caught in her throat. She knew the name. Everyone in the house knew the CEO's name. She hesitated, almost ready to hang up, but something in the man's tone stopped her. It wasn't casual. It was sharp, urgent, almost angry. "I need to speak to Mr. Carter immediately," the voice continued. "There is problem with the contract. Serious problem. If not fixed, deal is over." Maria blinked, her mind spinning. A contract. A deal. She wasn't trained for this. She wasn't even supposed to be on the phone. She opened her mouth, ready to apologize and explain that the CEO wasn't there. But the man kept talking, his voice rising. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. "We trusted your company. But the numbers are wrong. This is not corrected. Today, we walk away. Do you understand? Millions on the line?" Maria gripped the phone tighter, her palms sweating. Millions. She knew enough to realize this wasn't just any call. This wasn't a casual conversation. This was the kind of business that could make or break a billionaire's empire. For a brief moment, panic washed over her. She almost hung up, almost let fear decide for her. But something inside her pushed back. She thought of her daughter, the lessons she always tried to teach her. Be brave, even when it's hard. She remembered her own past, how she had once studied business. Before life had pulled her down a different path. She wasn't clueless. She understood more than anyone here realized. So instead of hanging up, she drew a slow breath. "Sir," she said, her voice firmer now, "Mr. Carter is not available at the moment, but I am here. Please, explain what is wrong?" There was a pause on the other end. The man hesitated. "Who are you?" he demanded. Maria's heart pounded. She could have said, "I'm just the maid." She could have admitted the truth and ended the call right there. But something inside her refused. If she told him that, he would hang up and the deal would be lost. Instead, she chose her words carefully. "I work in the office," she said simply, which wasn't a lie. She was in the office. After all, you can tell me. The man exhaled sharply, then began speaking again, faster this time. He explained that a major contract had errors, figures that didn't add up. He believed the company had made a mistake that would cost him millions. He was ready to cut ties with the CEO and take his business elsewhere. Maria listened closely, every word sinking into her mind. Her nerves trembled, but she forced herself to stay calm. She repeated his concerns back to him slowly, making sure she understood. She didn't argue. She didn't dismiss him. She simply listened. The man's anger softened slightly as he realized someone was paying attention. "Yes," he said, his voice still sharp but less hostile. "Exactly this. If not fixed today, deal finished." Maria nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Her mind worked quickly. She remembered overhearing conversations while dusting the office, details about contracts, numbers, and clients. She had thought those details meant nothing to her, just background noise while she worked. But now, they were the only thing guiding her. She steadied her voice. "I understand your concern," she said. "Please do not make any decisions yet. The company values you greatly. I promise this will be addressed." There was another pause. The man's tone shifted again, just slightly. "You promise?" he asked, his suspicion clear. Maria swallowed hard. She wasn't in a position to promise anything. She wasn't the CEO. She wasn't even his assistant. But she knew she couldn't let him end the call, feeling ignored. She had to keep him calm, to hold the line until someone could fix this. "Yes," she said firmly. "I promise." The line went quiet for a long second. Maria's heart thudded in her chest. Then finally, the man sighed. "Fine, but I expect call back. Soon, understand?" "Yes, sir," Maria said quickly. "You will have it." The call ended with a sharp click. Maria lowered the phone slowly, her hands shaking. She stood there in the middle of the CEO's office, staring at the receiver as if it were a bomb she had just disarmed. Her chest rose and fell quickly, her breath shallow. She had answered a call she was never meant to take. She had promised something she had no authority to promise. And yet, somehow, she had prevented disaster for now. What she didn't know was that her quick decision, her calmness, and her hidden knowledge had just saved the company's most important client. But the real storm was only beginning. Maria's hands were still trembling when she set the receiver down, but her ears rang with the voice she had just heard. It wasn't a casual conversation. The man on the other end hadn't been patient nor polite. His tone carried the weight of power, urgency, and threat. She could almost hear the tension in his breathing, the anger woven into his sharp words. This was no ordinary client. Whoever he was, his call had been important enough to decide the future of the company she quietly worked for, but never belonged to. The sound of his accent replayed in her mind. It was heavy, foreign, but not unclear. His English was broken, yet his meaning had been unmistakable. He had said millions were at stake. Millions. Maria tried to imagine such a number, but quickly pushed the thought away. It was too large, too overwhelming. she was just a maid. What business did she have standing between a billionaire CEO and a client whose decisions could shake entire markets? And yet, she had. The phone buzzed again in her imagination, though the office was now quiet. She replayed the call in her head, remembering each word: numbers wrong, contract mistake, deal is over. His voice had been cold, sharp as glass. He had spoken like a man used to giving orders, used to being obeyed. She remembered the way he had said, "Do you understand?" The sound of it still pressed against her chest. Maria walked slowly around the desk, her cloth forgotten in her hand. She touched the papers stacked neatly in files, her fingers brushing against numbers and words she had dusted 100 times without ever reading. But now, the words came alive in her mind. She had listened to enough conversations in this office conversations. She wasn't meant to hear to know a little about what these papers meant. Profit margins, client names, delivery deadlines. It was as though all those forgotten fragments of knowledge, picked up in silence, were rising now, fitting together into something useful. The client's voice returned to her memory, louder this time. He hadn't been exaggerating. He had sounded serious, desperate even. And in that desperation, she had heard something else. Fear. Not fear of her, of course, but fear of being cheated. Fear of losing trust. Fear of failure. He had been speaking not only as a businessman, but as a man, guarding his reputation. Maria understood that feeling all too well. For a moment, she sank into the chair behind the CEO's desk. Though she knew she shouldn't. Her hands rested on the polished wood, her reflection staring back at her from its shine. She whispered to herself, "What did I just do?" The quietness of her own voice startled her. She had promised him something, promised that the mistake would be addressed, that the company valued him, that he must wait. She had spoken words with the weight of authority, but she had none. Still, she had calmed him. She had held him on the line when he had been ready to hang up. She had kept the door open, if only for a moment. That had to mean something. Her thoughts were interrupted by the echo of the man's final words. "Fine, but I expect call back." Soon Maria knew she didn't have much time. Whoever that client was, he wasn't going to wait forever. His voice had been the kind of voice that ended things quickly when expectations weren't met. She imagined him sitting in an office far away, surrounded by assistants scribbling notes, his finger tapping impatiently on his desk, waiting, watching the clock. She looked again at the phone. Its small screen was dark now, silent after its outburst. But to Maria, it glowed like a door she had just opened, and one she couldn't close. Her heart pounded as she rose from the chair and began pacing the room. She thought of her daughter again, of the lessons she had tried to teach her. Don't let fear stop you. Don't let others decide what you're worth. Yet here she was, trembling, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake. And then, another memory surfaced, her own past. Years ago, before she became a maid, she had studied business in college. She had loved it, the numbers, the strategies, the way small details could shape big decisions. But when life became hard, when bills piled up and family needed her, she had left that path behind. She had traded textbooks for cleaning supplies, classrooms for long shifts in other people's houses. She had thought that dream was gone forever. But now, sitting in the office of a billionaire CEO, speaking to his most powerful client, that old knowledge returned like a spark in the dark. She understood more than she wanted to admit. She understood enough to know the client's concerns were real. And that gave her something dangerous, something powerful: responsibility. Maria leaned against the desk, closing her eyes. She could still hear the foreign man's voice in her ear, demanding, pressing, threatening. She didn't know who he truly was, but she could tell one thing. He wasn't a man used to being ignored. He was a man who expected answers. And soon, she Whispered again, her voice low but steady this time. "I can't let this fall apart." Her eyes opened, sharper now. She wasn't just the maid anymore, not in this moment. She was the only person who had heard the problem, the only one who had stopped disaster only for a short time. She wasn't sure how, but she knew she had to make sure the CEO learned about this call before it was too late. For Maria, the foreign voice was no longer just a sound on the phone. It was a storm on the horizon, and she was standing in its path. And, though she had been invisible in this house for years, today she was at the center of a story that could change everything. Maria stood in the CEO's office, the silence heavy after the call ended. Her heart was still racing, her palms damp with sweat, but inside her mind, something had shifted. She could have ignored the phone. She could have hung up the second she realized it wasn't meant for her. She could have walked away and pretended nothing had happened. But she didn't. She had stayed. She had promised. Now, she had a choice. She could run to the kitchen, continue dusting furniture, and pretend the conversation had never taken place. Or she could face the truth that she was the only person in the entire mansion who knew the danger the company was in. Maria moved slowly back to the desk and placed her hand on the phone again. Her reflection in the glossy black surface stared back at her. A maid dressed in a plain uniform, hair tied neatly, face marked by years of hard work. To the world, she was invisible. But in that moment, she saw something else, someone holding power without even realizing it. She began pacing the room, her footsteps soft against the thick carpet. Her mind replayed every word the client had spoken. He had mentioned numbers, contracts, deadlines. He had said the mistake was serious, that millions were at stake. Maria could almost hear his voice again, angry but also desperate. He hadn't wanted to leave. He had wanted the problem fixed. And she, just the maid, was the one who had bought time. She remembered the way she had promised him calmly, even though her hands had been shaking. That wasn't nothing. That had mattered. Maria took a deep breath and sat down in the CEO's leather chair again. She had never dared sit there before. Felt strange, almost wrong, but also empowering. The chair seemed too big for her small frame, but she straightened her back and placed her hands on the desk. For the first time, she wasn't just cleaning this office. She was inside it, living in the space where decisions were made. She leaned forward and studied the documents stacked neatly in folders. At first, the rows of numbers blurred together, intimidating and vast. But as she focused, they began to make sense. Her old knowledge returned like a light in a dark room. She traced the columns with her finger, spotting totals, percentages, projections. She noticed small details she remembered overhearing before. Suddenly, this wasn't foreign. It was familiar, like a language she hadn't spoken in years, but still remembered deep inside. Maria whispered to herself, he was right. Something's off here. She circled a number with her finger, noticing it didn't match the totals she had just calculated in her head. A simple mistake, but in a deal. This size, one wrong figure could mean disaster. Her chest tightened. She wasn't imagining it. The client's complaint had been real. For a moment, fear crept back in. What if I'm wrong? What if I've overstepped? She thought of the CEO's face, stern and impatient. The way he barked orders when things weren't perfect. She thought of the risk she was taking by even sitting in his chair. If he found out she had touched his files, she could lose everything: her job, her paycheck, her ability to care for her daughter. But then, another thought rose stronger. What if I do nothing? The deal fell apart. If the client walked away, the company would lose millions. The CEO would lose his biggest partner. And though Maria wasn't responsible, she knew in her heart she would always remember that moment. That she had been the only one who could have helped. Hey, and she had stayed silent. She couldn't live with that. Maria pushed her fear aside and picked up a pen. Her hand steadied as she wrote down notes on a scrap of paper. She didn't plan to solve everything, she knew she couldn't, but she could organize the client's complaint clearly. Outline the mistake she had spotted and prepare a simple explanation. That way, when the CEO or his assistants saw it, they could fix it quickly. Her mind worked faster now, her confidence growing. She remembered lectures from her college days, professors explaining how communication was often more important than knowledge. Clients didn't just want answers. They wanted to feel heard, respected, and reassured. That was what she had given the caller. She hadn't given him numbers. She had given him calm. Maria rehearsed in her head what she would say if the client called back before the CEO returned. She practiced the tone steady, professional, respectful. She imagined the man's voice again and pictured herself answering with dignity. The thought of it steadied her heartbeat. Her eyes moved to the large family portrait hanging above the desk. The CEO stood there proudly with his family, dressed in designer suits, smiling as though nothing in the world could touch them. Maria studied the picture, then looked down at herself. She was not in the frame. She was never in the frame. But at that moment, she realized she didn't need to be. What she had done was more important than a picture on the wall. Her stomach rumbled faintly, but she ignored it. Time was ticking. She leaned back in the chair and closed her eyes for a moment, whispering a prayer. God, give me courage. Just enough to finish what I started. The sound of the house around her was quiet. The distant ticking of a clock echoed through the hall. Somewhere upstairs, the family still slept, unaware that their empire had just come dangerously close to breaking. And down here, in silence, it was Maria the maid, the invisible one who was holding it together. Her phone buzzed in her pocket suddenly, making her jump. She pulled it out quickly, heart racing, but it was only a message from her daughter's teacher about a school assignment. Maria smiled faintly, her fear softening. For her daughter's sake, she had to be brave. She tucked the phone away, squared her shoulders, and looked at the desk one more time. She was ready now. Maria had stepped into a world that didn't belong to her, but she wasn't running away. She was staying. She was standing. And when the phone rang again, she knew this time. She would answer without hesitation. The office was quiet again, the kind of silence that made every small sound echo. Maria sat in the CEO's chair, her notes scattered across the polished desk. Her fingers tapped nervously against the paper as her mind replayed the call. She had done her best to calm the man, but his voice still rang inside her ears, firm, angry, filled with the power of someone who could crush everything with a single decision. She knew he would call back. He had promised as much, and men like him kept their word, especially when it came to business. The thought made her stomach twist. She was just a maid. She wasn't supposed to be here, sitting in this chair, holding the responsibility of millions. But the truth was clear. No one else in the mansion had answered. No one else had heard his warning. Right now, she was the only one standing between disaster and survival. The phone rang again. The sound made her jump, but this time she didn't freeze. Her hand reached forward quickly, her breath catching in her chest as she lifted the receiver. "Hello," she said, her voice steady, though her heart pounded wildly. The same voice answered, sharp and impatient. "Finally, I was waiting. Where is Mr. Carter?" Maria swallowed hard. "Sir, Mr. Carter is still not available. But I am here to listen. Please explain again. I want to make sure nothing is lost." There was a pause, then a frustrated sigh. The man spoke again, his words fast and clipped. "Your company made serious mistake. The delivery numbers and contract do not match. If this error is not fixed today, we end our partnership. Do you understand? I do not play games. Maria gripped the phone tighter, her knuckles pale. She understood. Every word, but the weight of them pressed heavily on her. End the partnership. Millions on the line. She could almost feel the empire shaking, ready to collapse. She took a slow breath. Yes, I understand, she said softly. But please, allow me to confirm what you mean. You are saying the contract lists the wrong delivery totals, correct? The man's voice hardened. Correct. It says 500 units, but agreement was for 5,000. This is unacceptable. It looks like trick, like dishonesty. Maria's heart sank. She scribbled the numbers onto her notepad. A difference that huge wasn't just a mistake, it was catastrophic. A single zero missing had turned a massive deal into a meaningless one. She imagined the CEO's reaction if he found out too late. His temper, his rage, the fallout. And worse, the client's suspicion was clear. He believed it wasn't an accident, but a deliberate attempt to cheat him, sir. Maria said quickly, her voice firmer now. I promise you, it is not dishonesty. It must be a mistake. I know this company, and I know how much they value your partnership. He interrupted sharply. Do not tell me what your company values. I want proof. I want correction today, or we are finished. Maria closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. Her instincts told her to stay calm, to slow the storm. I understand, she said gently. You are angry because this looks like betrayal. But please, hear me, this company does not want to lose you. The CEO will correct this. You will have a proper contract, as agreed. The line went silent for a long second. She thought he might hang up, that her words hadn't been enough. Her chest tightened, her breath shallow. Then finally, the man spoke again, slower this time. You say this with certainty. Who are you? The question hung in the air. Maria froze. She couldn't say she was the maid. She did, he would end the call in anger. She had to choose her words carefully. I am someone who works closely in this office. She said calmly, her voice steady, even though her heart raced. I have seen the documents. I know the value of your partnership. That is why I ask for your patience, just a little more time. Another pause. Then a low hum of thought came through the line. You speak with respect, he said slowly. Better than most I have dealt with. Fine, I will give you hours, but only hours. After that deal is finished. Maria's pen scratched against the paper as she wrote his demand. Fix by today. She felt a strange mix of fear and pride. She had done it. She had kept him from walking away, at least for now. But the clock was ticking louder than ever. Thank you, sir, she said, her voice low, but filled with sincerity. You won't regret this. The line clicked, and the call ended. Maria lowered the receiver slowly, her hand trembling again. She leaned back in the chair, her body heavy with the weight of what had just happened. She had held the company's biggest client on the line. She had calmed him enough to keep the deal alive, but only for a few hours. The CEO didn't act quickly. Everything would fall apart. She pressed her palms against her eyes, fighting back the wave of panic. She couldn't fail, not now. She thought again of her daughter, of all the times she had told her, be strong, even when the world says you are small. This was her moment to live those words. Maria stood abruptly, gathering the notes she had written. She circled the error again, bold and clear. 500 versus 5,000. Proof of the mistake. She would hand this directly to the CEO the moment he arrived. And if the client called back before then, she would answer again. She would not let the silence break the deal. The house around her was still quiet. The sound of ticking clocks filling the air. But inside Maria's chest, the clock was roaring. The crisis had unfolded, and she was standing at the center of it. For the first time in years, she wasn't just cleaning someone else's mess. she was saving something bigger than herself. Maria stood in the office, clutching her notepad with the scribbled numbers. Her pulse was still racing from the call, but beneath the fear, a new feeling was rising. It was something she hadn't felt in years. Confidence. She had spoken to a billionaire's client and kept him calm. She had promised him clarity and bought time, but time was short, and the problem was real. She glanced again at the contract papers on the CEO's desk. The numbers glared back at her, bold and wrong, as though daring her to prove she had seen correctly. 500 units instead of 5,000. Such a small mistake in writing, just a single zero missing. Yet it was enough to destroy trust and shatter a multi-million-dollar deal. Maria sat in the leather chair and let her fingers rest on the edge of the desk. Slowly, her memories began to unfold, memories she had buried years ago. Before she became a maid, before the mansion and the uniform, she had been a student. She remembered sitting in classrooms with chalkboards filled with numbers, studying business and finance. She remembered her notebooks covered in calculations and strategies. She remembered her professors saying, "Attention to detail is everything. One mistake can cost millions." At the time, she had dreamed of being a businesswoman herself. She had wanted to wear a suit, walk into offices, and speak with authority. But life had other plans. When her mother got sick and her family's bills piled up, she had dropped out to work. First it was waitressing, then cleaning, then finally domestic work in the homes of the rich. Her dream had faded, but the knowledge never completely disappeared. It was still there, hidden beneath years of silence, and now that hidden skill was waking up. Maria pulled the papers closer and began to study them more carefully. She checked the delivery numbers against the totals, recalculated percentages in her head, and compared figures across different pages. Her hand moved quickly. As she jotted notes in the margins of her pad, the mistake wasn't just one line, it had affected the totals, the projected profits, everything. The client's anger made sense now. If she had been in his place, she would have suspected dishonesty too. Her brow furrowed as she flipped to another file. The error was so obvious once you knew where to look. How had no one noticed before? The CEO had a team of assistants, accountants, analysts. Yet somehow, this had slipped through. Maria shook her head. It was proof that even the powerful could make careless mistakes. The phone sat on the desk, silent for now, but she knew it wouldn't stay that way. The client had given her hours, nothing more. And when he called back, he would expect answers, not excuses. Maria leaned back in the chair and whispered to herself, "You can do this." The words were quiet, but they carried weight. She had repeated them to her daughter so many times during homework sessions. Now she was repeating them to herself. She remembered another lesson from her college days. Clients don't just want numbers, they want reassurance. The foreign businessman hadn't only been upset about the error. He had been upset about the feeling of being cheated, of not being respected. That was why he had shouted. That was why he had threatened to leave. If Maria could reassure him with truth, with honesty, she could hold him until the CEO arrived. Her hidden skill wasn't only in numbers, it was in people. Maria took another deep breath and began drafting a simple explanation on paper. She wrote in clear, simple words, the kind that anyone could understand. She explained that the missing zero was a clerical error, not dishonesty. She explained that the company valued the client's trust, that correcting the numbers would prove the agreement was real. As she wrote, her hand grew steadier. This wasn't just scribbles anymore. This was preparation. For the first time, Maria didn't feel like an intruder in this office. She didn't feel like a stranger touching paper she wasn't meant to touch. She felt like she belonged here, as though this desk, this phone, and this crisis had been waiting for her all along. She thought of her daughter again, her bright eyes when she said, "Mama, you're the smartest person I know." Maria had always smiled sadly, brushing it off because she had believed her chances were gone. But maybe her daughter had seen something she hadn't. Maybe she had been right. All along. The clock ticked louder in the hallway, reminding her that the CEO could arrive at any moment. She imagined his reaction: shock, maybe anger that she had dared to touch his work. But she pushed the fear aside. She wasn't doing this for recognition. She wasn't doing it for praise. She was doing it because someone had to, and she was the only one there. The phone buzzed suddenly, making her jump. She grabbed it quickly, her breath caught in her throat. "Hello?" she answered, her voice steady. It was him again. The foreign voice, sharp and impatient. "I am waiting. Do you have answers?" Maria pressed her notes flat against the desk and steadied her tone. "Yes, sir. I looked over the documents, and I can see the mistake. It is a clerical error. Extra zero was missing. But I want you to know this company is committed to your deal. There is no dishonesty, only a mistake, and one that will be corrected immediately." Silence, the longest silence yet. Maria gripped the phone tighter, her hand damp with sweat. Finally, the man spoke, his tone softer, thoughtful. "You sound certain." "Yes," Maria replied firmly. "Because I am. I give you my word, and I will make sure this is corrected. Before the day ends." Another pause, then a sigh. "Very well. I will wait, but not long. You must prove it." "Yes, sir," Maria said, her voice strong. "You will have it." The line clicked again. The phone went silent. Maria lowered it slowly, her hands no longer trembling. She looked down at her notes, at the proof she had gathered, and at the explanation she had prepared. For the first time, she didn't just feel like a maid who had answered the wrong phone. She felt like something more like the person who had just saved a deal worth millions. Her hidden skill had become her strength, and soon everyone would see it.